Yeah, well, thanks everyone for joining. We're excited to launch another learning journey with people around the world. It's always exciting for Tim and I and Matthias to interact with people from various places who had various experiences, some of them very intense humanitarian experiences, sometimes never been in a humanitarian response, but curious to learn more. So yeah, we're always excited to do this. It's a particularly interesting time. Actually, I'm at a conference right now, an academic conference called the Production and Operations Management Society. And we had a mini conference yesterday in the Humanitarian Operations College. And we visited the IRC, International Rescue Committee. And they run programs to do settlement of immigrants and asylum seekers in the US, extensive programs. They have 29 offices across the US to help receive immigrants. Um, and help them settle into homes and jobs and education systems and so forth. It's a really amazing organization. They also provide international response in emergencies and then providing health system strengthening overseas. So they're a vast organization, but they've been really affected by government policy recently, losing a lot of funding, trying to figure out how to adapt their operations. So in humanitarian crisis, we're always facing different kinds of crises. And right now, there's a real struggle and a fight to defend the importance of humanitarian action. So I'm glad you're joining the class now. It's a really important time to be coming together and learning about how we can do things to help uh, meet people's needs around the world and help them find a home that's safe if they've been in conflict. That's what IRC really was founded around and is central in working in those conflict settings. So anyway, it's a little bit of a somber time, but it's actually there's a real spirit yesterday of humanitarians coming together to say, we know this is right, and we will take this opportunity to strengthen what we've been doing by doing it better in the future by restoring these capabilities in the future. So I hope you're excited by this opportunity to learn more about humanitarian operations and to step into a moment of time when I think there's opportunity to really make some change. So anyway, I know I started. I'm just in a really emotional space because I care about all of the people around the world who have been served by these programs, and I want to help them get reestablished. Now, the key is if we get funding reestablished, how do we make our supply chains work better so that they can do more in a crisis? And that's what this course is about. So let's go around and do some introductions. We're going to tell a few stories to begin with of prior experiences. I'll walk you through some of the humanitarian labs experience over time and kind of where this course, some of the experiences this course came out of. I'll dive into one specifically because there's a connection to Jason Zotos, our guest for today, who took the course in the first run and has come back to talk about what he does and how this kind of learning around supply chains that have to adapt, how to put that into practice in various challenging situations. So that's what we're going to go over today. But intros, I'll just say I'm the course instructor, Jarrod Goentzel. So I created this course because, and I'll show you some pictures in a moment, my class on campus, I wanted to have it be a flipped classroom. I wanted to have the students not come and listen to me lecture, but come and solve problems together during the class period. So I had to start recording my lectures ahead of time so they could watch them. And then when they came to class, we could all work on problems together. Well, we finally accomplished that a few years ago. It's been a joy to teach the class this way, where students come and, we just have a new problem, we solve it every class period by watching the videos ahead of time. But these are the videos the students in a graduate program at MIT watch to understand and master the concepts to come up with a plan for humanitarian action in a supply chain. So it can seem long at times, and we get a little bit into math. It's not a lot of math, it's just a little bit, but it is the kinds of things that we think are some best practices in making sure you can come up with a plan. So we expose you to that if you want to learn those things. And trust me, in the actual humanitarian action, people are going to always be adapting. They won't be always implementing things the same way, but understanding the concepts and how a plan can come together helps you adapt the plan more effectively. So that's what really the course is about. So I started this lab, the course I started in 2011, which is about the same time I started this lab as a formal entity. But the work began. I did my PhD in supply chain at Georgia Tech, finished in 1998. Worked in industry for a few years, then came to MIT to set up a program in Zaragoza, Spain. That was my first role. And while doing that, I started doing research on humanitarian supply chains. I'd been working on commercial supply chains. I did my PhD with Ford Motor Company, helping optimize their global parts supply chain. But I grew up responding to disasters in Kansas. I'm from Kansas originally, where they have tornadoes there. And when a tornado hits a house, that really devastates the household. And so I would, with organizations, with faith-based organizations, show up and help them clear out their basement, get the flooding out, and so forth. So I've been doing that since I was young, and was really excited when I could do that work as a professional in supply chain management. The key to me getting into this was having a student who was interested in this topic. So I'm going to pass it over to Tim to tell his story and introduce himself a bit.
Thanks, Jarrod. Yeah, so my name is Tim Russell. I'm a research engineer here at MIT in Jarrod's lab. And I guess, like Jarrod said, it all goes back to when I kind of first came to MIT. I had been living abroad, working in the Peace Corps in refugee impacted areas, and working with organizations in like the shelter cluster and doing work where the UN was intervening after the intervention in Kosovo. So I was in former Yugoslavia. And then I applied to the master's program at MIT and then to do humanitarian logistics. And they brought me in and were like, well, we don't really know much about that, but we're welcome to have you come and study it. And Jarrod was willing to be my advisor. And then while we were working on that research, the Indian Ocean tsunami hit. And that became the focus of my time there at MIT. And so Jarrod was instrumental in like helping me study humanitarian logistics and then picking it up and taking it forward after that and creating the lab. After I finished at MIT, I went back to industry, put my wife through grad school, and then after a while, then went to go work for the World Food Program in Sudan. Jarrod brought me back in 2016 to MIT, and then we've been here ever since. And my role in the course is kind of behind the scenes, making sure that the website is working and helping to answer questions. If you have any problems or you notice things that need to be fixed, just reach out on the discussion board. It's a fun place for us to talk and build community. And speaking of building community, maybe I'll turn it over to Matias, our community TA, give you a chance to introduce yourself and maybe talk about how much you've been involved with all of the online learning at MIT.
Thank you, Tim. I'm glad to be here for the third run of the course again. So it's a pleasure for me. I'll be one of your, well, actually the only one of your community teaching assistants. And I'm from Germany. I'm a 2023 graduate of MIT's master's program. Jarrod and Tim were my advisors on a capstone project in the humanitarian lab. That was a super exciting project. And because Tim said my background in the online learning of MIT is for the master's program, I did the micromasters in supply chain management. And I've been a CTA there for more than 30 times. That's at least what I counted. And I've already seen a couple of names on the forum and now here in the chat that I recognize. And I mean, we have, for example, Amrinda here, who is also a fellow CTA. Well, also welcome to the course. And looking forward to seeing you on the forum, on helping you with any questions you might have. And if you have questions to me, also feel free on the forum or via LinkedIn.
Yeah, thanks, Matias. Yeah, and yeah, people are introducing themselves in the chat, so please do that. Let us know where you're from. It's good to see people from around the world there. showing up. And Wolfgang, I agree. From what we hear, Matthias is very helpful in the MicroMasters courses. So for us, we're really fortunate that he had an interest and a passion in humanitarian logistics and is also working with this elective course as well. So.
Yeah, and let me just say, Jarrod, that this is a webinar format for today's meeting. So like it'd be great if you introduce yourself in the chat, but we're not going to be having lots of questions from the audience today. Later on, we will have more of these kind of office hours, and we'll have a chance for more dialogue and back and forth, and having a call where everyone can chat. Yeah.
Yeah, today we're just going to give you an overview, but we do look forward to the conversations in the discussion board, and then as for future virtual office hours as well. So, but yeah, please do introduce yourself in the chat, and go to the discussion board and introduce yourself there if you haven't done that either. So, I want to now turn to introduce our guest speaker today. Let him say about himself, and then I'll start telling some stories, and he'll tell some stories. But Jason Zotos is the Director of Procurement and Supply Chain Management for the New York City Public Schools. You wouldn't have thought of public schools as having a humanitarian aspect, but human services come in all sorts of forms, and operations are key to making sure that human services can be provided. So Jason, maybe you can see a bit more about your background, and we'll come back later and hear some more stories.
Sure. Thank you so much, everyone. So it's an honor to be here today and to introduce this class. And as Jarrod had mentioned, I took this class, the inaugural class, a couple years ago. So there are great tools, great knowledge to be learned from this class, and the format, the material is great, and you have a great staff to lead you along the way. So as someone who's completed this task, I've been working with and attending events at MIT for over a decade. I recently spoke with Jarrod a few months ago about some of the qualitative aspects of supply chain. Supply chain is a social science, and sort of what can happen in the real world. So for today's call, I want to take a few minutes, talk about a couple real world scenarios that I've experienced in my career. And then a few takeaways that may or may not be of value, but that have been helpful for me as well. So a little bit about my role with the city of New York. So New York City Public Schools is the largest school district in the US. It's 1,500 schools. It's 130 million square feet, and we have 900,000 students. So pretty big organization. My team is the Division of School Facilities. We make sure that the buildings are running, that the schools are safe, that they have the necessary materials. So not necessarily thought about, especially pre-2020. Supply chain was not as talked about. Now we all know that supply chain is a phrase that most people are familiar with. So a lot of the work that we do that was sort of unseen is now in the forefront. So I want to applaud everyone for just taking an interest in it and participating as well. So as far as the real world scenario, the first that I'll speak of.
Actually, can we come back to the real world scenarios? I'm going to do a little intro, a little connection here first, a background of the course, and then I want to come back and let you provide that context, because it's true, the course is really focused on giving you a foundation for planning, but I asked Jason to come back and say, how does that play out? Because the world you'll face in a humanitarian crisis is not the one that you anticipate. And so being able to understand how to plan and adapt those plans is really key. And so I'm going to do a little intro here and show some pictures. And then you got some pictures too, right, Jason, to tell some stories?
I don't have pictures, but I'll try and speak vividly.
All right. Well, let me share my slides here real quick. So again, welcome to this course. A little bit about the lab itself, a broader introduction. Again, like I said, we formally started in 2011, but when Tim and I started doing research in 2004 with the Indian Ocean tsunami, but But the biggest event that catalyzed our work was the Haiti earthquake in 2010. It was devastating to that community because a lot of the buildings weren't built to the code for that kind of type of seismic event, and a lot of people were displaced. It was a major international humanitarian crisis, and we were involved on the ground supporting the U.S. government doing what's called needs assessments. And that's when we had been studying the supply chain. It was a chance for us to get to understand something called needs assessment, which you'll hear about in the demand planning section. So, in typical supply chains, you have ways of forecasting demand, but when there's a sudden onset event like an earthquake, there's no forecasting forecasting is limited. And so you have to think about other ways to come up with demand plans. So we'll talk about that in section 2 of the course. The next big event was Superstorm Sandy, or Hurricane Sandy. It hit New York in October 2012. I'm going to come back and tell a bit more of that story because there's a connection to Jason there. As Tim mentioned, he got involved. We had a big program in Darfur with World Food Program on cash and vouchers. So a lot of times providing aid is best done through providing beneficiaries the cash they need to buy what they need, rather than trying to estimate or guess or assess what people would need and ship it in. Giving them cash allows them to buy what they actually do need. But the key is that the supply chains in those communities have to have recovered. There has to be resilience of those supply chains. And that's what we started studying in that context in Darfur. And that has really been the foundation of a lot of our research since then, because it is the best kind of response. In the US, we have a program called SNAP, which provides food assistance to people who live below the poverty line. And in a disaster, they can immediately turn that into DSNAP, Disaster SNAP, to provide some extra support when there's a crisis. And so that kind of programming is really effective. We don't talk about the market assessment stuff as much in this class. We talk about planning a supply chain when you will need to bring in goods and in-kind aid, but a lot of our research is in that area now. Then another big opportunity was the Ebola epidemic in West Africa. And we were part of an operation, and you'll hear more about that in the course, where we set up a supply chain. I actually, in that case, had a chance to operate the supply chain and run it, and learned a lot by doing it myself, an academic going out in the field and actually running a supply chain in a crisis where we were invited by the government of Liberia to provide support. So a lot of examples in the course from Haiti, from that Liberia experience on the ground. Since then, we've done more work into markets, like we said, understanding in Uganda. We had a big project in Uganda to understand markets for agricultural products so that there could be food in the markets when there's a food crisis. In 2017, we got really involved domestically in the US with a busy hurricane season with Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria that came back to back, had massive impacts in the Texas area and Florida, and then in Puerto Rico, and worked with FEMA to help understand that supply chain resilience. And a lot of our work and our research is coming out of that, with the National Academy study in 2020, work during COVID-19 to analyze supply chains adapting to COVID, diving in deep to certain systems. We've done a lot of work on fuel. How does fuel get to communities? Because that's so important to enable mobility of trucks and people, but also power generators to provide electricity when the power is out. Doing work on vaccines to be able to maximize coverage, all the way up to, we've got some recent work. We started some work before the pandemic, but it's really scaled up in 2024 with a roundtable on post-disaster housing. So as you see, we cover lots of different types of needs, each different kinds of supply chains, but the principles in the course here will help you understand those supply chains and those systems, regardless of the commodity or the item that would be most critical and most difficult to acquire. So back to Hurricane Sandy. I'm going to tell a little story here and then pivot over to Jason. So Hurricane Sandy in 2012, you can see the track here, came up the coast. It was out in the ocean. And then they predicted it's going to take a left turn and come right in and hit New York City. It's like the perfect storm for New York because it brings all the storm surge. into a bay. You know, if you zoom in, you can see this. It's on the strong side of the storm here, on the strong side of the storm. All the water came into this bay, had nowhere to go except into the city, and it really wreaked havoc on the city. You can see on the bottom here, I found a picture. That's the subway in New York City. And you can see water coming through the elevator shaft. That's not what you want to have coming down your elevator, is water. And it flooded the subways. People could not get around, really affected things. And we had been working with New York City Office of Emergency Management on a project prior to the hurricane. And I actually really was aware of, they had done a really good job in the years before to let everyone in the city know where their evacuation centers were, where the shelters were. So everyone in the city, and they did a massive marketing campaign. I don't know, Jason, did you know where your shelter was? Is that, it seemed like everybody had a good awareness of that.
Yes, yeah, it was well communicated.
Yeah. So the nice thing is people knew where to go to shelter, and they got out of harm's way. That was a really effective campaign by the Office of Emergency Management to get people to shelters. The thing is, a lot of the shelters were in schools. And so what you also want to do is be able to help people restore their lives and livelihoods, including people who have jobs, needing their kids to go to school, not only for the education, but so that they can go to work. And so as soon as the storm hit, I was not there in the immediate response the first couple days, but once it came to the weekend, a few days after the hurricane, the priority became, we've got to open the schools up Monday morning. We need to have people to be able to have the livelihoods come back into position. So again, you never know what you're going to face in a crisis. Normally, I'm planning what I call the forward logistics of bringing goods into a disaster area. In this case, I was asked by New York City when I went and volunteered to help do a reverse logistics supply chain, bring the goods out of the schools, out of the shelters, and restore them to be a school on Monday morning. So this is what I faced. We walked in. They had taken all the cots and things out, but there were still supplies by the time I arrived, and they had to figure out how to get all this stuff that was stocked in here for this shelter out of there so that they could open the school on Monday. And so one of the challenges is this is a picture from the New York Times. I put a credit here because I didn't get a picture of the door. I was too busy working. I didn't get all the pictures I would have liked to in the moment. But bringing stuff out of the school, the challenge, as Jason can tell you, the doors are made of steel and they're rigid and they're not going to be changed, and they are not pallet width. You will learn what the pallet width is. It's a very specific measurement in the course. And it's very important to know that measurement, because when your door is not as wide as a pallet, this makes logistics really difficult. So we had to put everything onto carts, bring them out by the truck, and then make pallets and then put them on the truck. So it was a really intensive operation, because the school system, when they built these schools decades ago, Jason can tell you how old they are, they were not thinking maybe about the schools playing an important role of a shelter in a crisis, and didn't think about bringing supplies in the pallet with pallets. And so it was just not thought ahead of time. So this is where understanding what you might need in a crisis would also help prepare the capabilities ahead of a crisis. So it was great to work with the person with the New York City Emergency Management. And one other little side story: when you work in logistics, you get to know all of the capabilities, including I was sleeping at the Logistics Operations Center, and they had search and rescue trucks. So I could sleep on a cot, but the search and rescue trucks have what they call a sleeper cab right there. So when you know logistics, the trucks have a sleeper cab. I had the best bed in the whole emergency operation, because I knew that some trucks have really good places to sleep. So important to know logistics for various reasons. So I'll pivot over to Jason now and have him tell some stories about the ongoing challenges of providing operations for the schools during a crisis.
Cheers. Thank you so much, Jarrod, and thank you for what you do and have done. My experiences are varied and wide. For today's call, I'm going to stick to the year 2020. And as most are probably aware, there was a global pandemic at that time. So to pivot off what Jarrod spoke to, similar to during the hurricane, that these were shelters, during the pandemic, the city decided that the schools would serve as feeding centers so that anyone in New York City could come to a school and get a hot meal, no questions asked, no ID necessary. So this benevolence was a strategy and was the right thing to do. So my teams need to make sure that the schools had heat and had hot water and ventilation, for instance, and PPE and everything they needed to have a safe environment to make these meals and to feed our citizens was a big priority of ours. So as far as the materials, the logistics, two unique procurements that we worked on. The first may come off as a bit grim. It's 8:30 here in New York in the morning, but the first procurement that we worked on in April was actually what was called the casket project, or what some might refer to as a coffin. So there was a concern as New York became the epicenter of the global pandemic that the number of deaths would be increasing, and that for those with no next of kin, that the city could respond and, you know, maintain dignity and civility in the midst of this chaos. So the fact that we have custodian engineers, we have tradespeople, our tradespeople were available. So the mayor's office came to my team, came to my tradespeople, and they thought that with our staff, with our carpenters, and with our procurement abilities, requested that we provide numbers for this project, that we source this material, and that we provide labor for this project. So few data points here. The ask was for 8,400 caskets to be manufactured in 12 weeks. The scope, as I mentioned, you can imagine, is pretty large. It required 11,000 sheets of plywood. So each plywood sheet was 3/4 of an inch thick. So the math here, you're talking over 900 feet of plywood stacked up, which is uh, relative to the height of the Chrysler building. So very big procurement. This came across my desk, I think Wednesday at 1. And, you know, we talk about, is this an email? Is this a phone call? How will you manage this? This was all managed over the phone. This request came in at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday. All of the math for the materials and the tools and the labor and the safety equipment was obtained and provided by 4 p.m. So in under 3 hours, we were able to let them know 700,000 in supplies, 600,000 in labor. We came to be advised by the lumber company that every other municipality in the Northeast US was trying to do the same thing, trying to procure lumber. But due to our strong and long-standing relationships with our vendors, they gave us a verbal commitment that they would provide us with these materials, weekly deliveries for 12 weeks. So we were able to cut the PO with our supply chain integrator and secure those materials and complete this project on time, on budget. So a couple takeaways there. This creativity, Jarrod mentioned it. It is in the forefront, and it's something that I think it's something unique amongst us as human beings that we do. So I think it's something that I would just recommend that everyone keep a little bit of that in your pocket. And then the other piece is this adage of keeping things as simple as possible, not simpler. I didn't come up with that, but it is relevant in our work. So as you are working on projects of this scope, that even though your data may point to 1/1000th of a decimal point, for the decision makers, they often want that data aggregated and they want to hear it in 30 seconds, not in 30 minutes. So ideally, again, this is something that likely 90% of us on this call do on a daily basis, but I think it's of note, and it's a real world example. So the other scenario I want to speak of is about what we refer to as MERV 13 filters. So each, hey Tim, so each school has central ventilation, air handling units, rooftop units, etc. And as this pandemic progressed, I think everybody realized air quality was the name of the game. This is an airborne illness. Ventilation is the name of the game. So in the first few months of the pandemic was the rush for N95 masks, things of that nature. But New York City was the first school district in the country to reopen. We knew that in order to have a sense of normalcy and getting back to regular life, we needed to reopen our schools. We were open in September of that year, and we realized that we would need ample filtration of our ventilation systems. So to talk about those materials, those filters, they slide into the vents. And what we learned was that when we were ordering in eaches and cases, that at first we saw some orders relate, but then it seemed that there was a disruption. Turned out that that was the case. And it turned out that our integrator advised that their vendor was unable to procure materials. So this is where, again, the creativity piece comes in, working with our CEO at the Division of School Facilities. Uh, he actually engaged private sector, and there was a multinational realty company. And he asked me again, this was the same day procurement ask, to get an idea of what we would need in order to make sure that our schools had sufficient inventory of filters for our ventilation systems. So uh, this this ask came over to me, and again, there's a lot of data here. We do tens of thousands of orders a month, and to comb through that data was a big ask. But again, this sort of human side of simplifying that data and presenting it in a digestible manner, uh, my team actually leaned into the 80/20 rule. We had about 200 SKUs of filters that we ordered, but in order to procure these goods, A, we needed to narrow it down to 15 SKUs. B, at this point of the pandemic, no one could get an each or a case, and really no one could get pallets. So the only way that we could do this procurement was by the truckload. So we put in a procurement through this private sector directly to the manufacturer for I believe it was about 300,000 units, several truckloads. I think it was 6 or 7 truckloads. And later that day, they came back with the quote. And then within 24 hours, we sort of pulled back the curtain. We made the connection with the manufacturer, introduced them to our supply chain integrator, and we're able to cut that PO with 24 hours, secure that material, receive weekly container loads of these filters to make sure that our schools had clean air. So another sort of get it done. And my boss said to me, failure's not an option. So it was very important to us. We made it happen, and it was a team effort. A lot of great people, and it's something I take pride in as far as the work I've done over time. So I think where I can tie this back together is this humanitarian piece. It's of great value. About half of my career was in private sector. I was involved in global logistics for wine and spirits. And for the last 10 plus years, I've been involved in this civil sector work with the city of New York. And, these are real people. We're real people. Our stakeholders are real people. And, you know, there's a certain egalitarianism to this. The people that work in our warehouses to are as important as our senior leadership, as our CEOs. So same with our vendors. What we learn from the pandemic and what we learn in general from these extraordinary instances that we can't necessarily predict is that you may not have more than one person or more than one company or more than one entity that can help you. So the relationships are paramount. This integrity and this courtesy to extend that throughout your career, because when you need it, it's your past actions that you will be working from. So the last sort of takeaway I want to talk about here is that throughout this process, lasted over a year, my team had daily Comstat calls, and one of the sort of leads here is another saying that I didn't come up with, but again has had value, is no one cares until they know that you care. So, each day we want to make sure our team is good, their families are good, etc. So yeah, that's it. That's it.
That's great, Jason. I really appreciate you emphasizing all these things, because I will say, once you get into the course, it might feel like, well, where are the people in this? And we do motivate all of the concepts with examples and so forth. But it is a human enterprise. We are serving individuals. I often have to, when I'm thinking about the complex systems, I have to remember there are individuals at the end of that supply chain. And I have to remember that I'm trying to do what I can for every individual out there, and trying to adapt so that they can get what they need. And the thing is, when you're facing a 24-hour procurement, that's not the time to pull out the textbook and figure out how to do procurement, right? It's too late. You won't be able to adapt because you don't have a foundation. And this course teaches the foundations of how you would put together a supply chain on a moment's notice, but then you're going to be given a challenge that you did not expect. And so what you've already learned by practicing and thinking through examples in class is what you'll tap in that moment. I'm guessing Jason didn't do a forecast of caskets. Like he had not a thought, but in his mind, probably like, well, how many am I going to need? You start structuring of how many am I going to need? And in the demand planning, we'll talk about ways that people come up with estimates based on rules of thumb and so forth. So this is not all data science. I mean, that can be applied. I have a student who graduated recently that works for the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, doing advanced AI forecasting and then trying to get funding from organizations in anticipation of disasters because we can predict them. There is that opportunity occasionally to use really advanced methods, but a lot of times it's, what are the basic principles I need to solve the crisis at the moment? And I have not thought about it before. You want to jump in, Jason?
Yeah, I would, and I think it's a great talking point. So, although there is a level of chaos within humanitarian supply chain, the fundamentals, the science, the materials that Jarrod and Tim and his team put together, super useful, and you will use these. So, my goal is to give you these sort of real world examples of what you may run into, and Jarrod mentioned stop. Hey, it gets a bit emotional. I would also, and as you can tell, this is my first time talking to this in 5 years. So, but I'd also say keep it light. I mean, when we got these calls on a Wednesday, you almost can't help but laugh because no one wakes up thinking you're going to get a call. Oh, I need 8,000 caskets, especially when normally you're shipping paper towels. So or drywall or sheetrock or whatever I used to ship. So, it was definitely a left turn. So within that, I mentioned this self-care, make sure your team is good, etc. I would also say keep it light, separate the math, Jarrod and his team are the best in the business as far as that math and science piece, and that should be your lead. That should be what you're leading with. Acknowledge it can be a little difficult, but also keep it light. Being dreadful or pulling out your hair isn't helping deliver, isn't helping execute. So be sympathetic to yourself and others, but keep calm under pressure. And if you do this work, throughout your career, if you're learning, if you're working with good people, you'll be good. So yeah, I think that helps. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, a
Cheers.
couple of things to build off of what Jason's adding, and he's adding a lot of the important things that we don't talk about directly in the course, but that you will need to have to be successful. One thing is communicating to the people, effectively what you're doing. And when they come and say we need 8,000 caskets, you should be ready to go back and say, okay, I did a quick calculation. We may only need 5,000, right? Like, because sometimes the ask will be more because people people have the tendency in a crisis to just buffer and add and so forth. Well, a procurement of 8,000 is very different than a procurement for 5,000 with the ability to get 3,000 more because we've thought about how to get the second shipment, right? Or the second wave, right? So you can come back to somebody who makes a request and say, let's do this in a more structured way so that I can deliver what you need. And you have that, and you can have that conversation about what is the need we intend to serve. We talk about that a lot in section 2. What is the demand you intend to serve? And then you structure your supply chain for that. And that negotiation with the people who are making the ask on when do you need it and where, at what time is important because it sets the stage for things. And also ongoing communication. You will come up with a plan, but you'll have to change it. But the fact that you came up with a plan enables you to change it much more quickly. So I'll say in the class, and I'll get to this in a minute, like the students in class, I give them nasty problems. They don't like them. They're not textbook problems. And I said, but you still have to make a plan. This is the real life. You're not given a cookie cutter, right? And so in my class, the students struggle a bit like, well, what are you doing here? Make an assumption, make it logical to me, communicate to me as someone who's asking you to do something. That's what we really do in the class. So, and the final thing is, Jason said, it is a human enterprise. So you remember the people you're serving, but also know the people you're serving with, and self-care is really important. And especially if you have the ability in a community to get to know people ahead of a crisis, you'll be in solidarity when you're actually responding. And so that's one thing I like about this course is it allows you to maybe meet people from around the world with whom you can have solidarity and who can have your back. Even if they're not directly responding, they can be there to provide that support for you when you're in that moment, when you're facing that challenge. And so I do love the fact that this humanitarian sector does invite us to get to know each other as humans, as fellow humanitarians, so that we can be there for each other when the time is needed, including when there's political crises and the whole challenge of funding is there. I'm seeing that come together now among practitioners and academics. So on that front, I'm going to go over to the chat. Thanks for introducing yourself. I'll say Farouk from Finland. I have already met Diego Vega at the PALMS conference. He was on the tour yesterday at the IRC. So I'll say hello to him today from you. I'm seeing people from Kampala. Tim and I spent a lot of time in Kampala. Who was it? Somebody earlier in the chat there. Fond memories of that city and all the great places we would hang out there. Kevin Horrocks worked together with you with Mike Veach back in the day. Good to have you back in the course. I'm glad to see you coming in. I'd love to hear what you think about the materials that have been developed since we worked together and how useful they are. And all the rest of you, I do, when I was recording videos lonely in the studio, I was often thinking about a few people like you who are on right now and thinking, okay, they're going to be watching these videos at a time they're doing a job and they want to learn something and they're doing this outside of hours. So just to be there with you in your efforts to learn a little bit more. That's how I always try to think of, always thinking of the person you're serving is really important, including when you're creating teaching materials. So know that I didn't know you yet, but I was thinking about you individually when I was recording the videos, and I hope they work. Some of the videos are older than others. I'll kind of walk through things now a little bit and kind of give you a sense of the course with a few more slides here to give you an intro. So I told you on campus, we have the students just work on problems in class. So here's a couple pictures from the class this spring. It's spring. It was started in February, ends in March. That is not spring in Boston, but the last session, we did have a warm day. So we still have coats on, but we did go outside and solve problems. But again, they're trying to deal with problems that are not pretty. I don't give them all the data. I don't give them clean data. So yet they have to deal with that context in coming up with a plan. And so I don't do that online. I mean, I'll give you things. I want you to learn the concepts in this course, so we don't make it that challenging here. But know that by watching these videos, these students could then deal with a problem that was not like the ones in the videos, and that was not like what they will face in reality. So that ability to adapt to the context is what we're trying to give you with the course material. So here's a quick overview. Again, we're going to start the first section on context and systems. What basically everything is about context, because like Jason says, the context of a pandemic, he wasn't thinking about that when he took his job at the New York City Public Schools, right? So context will give you a challenge. And so understanding what kind of context we deal with, what kinds of hazards, what kind of vulnerabilities give us these humanitarian crises. What are the systems that are in place internationally? And I focus on domestically in the US because that's the emergency management system I know, but it translates to a lot of other national emergency management organizations around the world. Then I talk about logistics systems. If you've never taken a course on supply chain, don't know what a supply chain is, we start from the beginning and explain what a supply chain is and what logistics is as a system and how it works together as a complex system that we can then manage. And then at the end of section 1, I give you a little bit of a framework and some definitions that we'll use throughout the rest of the course, which will focus on planning. So when you start planning, you start with demand. Every good supply chain starts with demand. And so we'll talk about how you think about demand plan creation and how you communicate it. Like I said, and Jason was emphasizing, how you're communicating to others. And it's a social science. So you need to make sure other people understand what you've put together so that you're all acting together to effectively meet the moment in the humanitarian crisis. So we'll talk about demand planning in general, and specifically something called needs assessment. This is something you will not get in a supply chain class anywhere else. This is somewhat unique to the humanitarian sector, is we don't have historical data to use to predict demand. So we have to assess what's going on. And how do we get primary data, secondary data? How do we analyze it to make the best guess as to what needs are going to be? And then there's a lot of videos here because I started recording shorter videos to get little concepts. So I changed my format as I was creating these videos for the students on campus. But it walks through forecasting, which can be useful, and what kind of forecasting is useful, especially something called time series forecasting. Because as soon as you start getting demand, you can start tracking that demand and use that to understand what's going on. So this is I think the most useful. It's a fairly straightforward approach. The math to tell you how to do it in a spreadsheet may seem complicated, but it's basically a spreadsheet. It's a way of structuring a spreadsheet so that instead of starting a crisis and trying to make up something on your own, you will have created spreadsheets in this course that you can already start tracking demand for any item at any time and have ways to adjust with the trends and the things that are happening in real time. So it's one of the more useful demand forecasting approaches. It's pretty simple, and it applies and it is robust in a lot of situations. And we'll talk about different kinds of forecasting at the end of what other kind of forecasting be useful. Then once you have demand set and you've got your intentions on demand, you plan according to those intentions. There's 2 phases here we talk about. Preparedness phase, so you haven't had a disaster. How do you think about setting up your procurement systems? How do you deal with in-kind donations, which are a common thing in a crisis that can be very useful, but they can also, if not managed well, can become a burden. And then how do you pre-position stock? How do you get stock ahead of time that can go out immediately so you don't have to wait for procurement processes to happen? You wouldn't necessarily pre-position caskets, but you would, for the items you're typically going to need, having a pre-positioned stock to immediately respond is really important, and knowing what to do with that pre-positioned stock. And then once you're in response phase, how do you think about continuing to replenish things? And this is really fundamental supply chain management, but in the humanitarian context. So we've got a demand in our supply plans. The last thing is distributing and moving things. And again, here I've got shorter videos to cover a lot of context. If you've never seen a supply chain, you will see pictures and examples of everything on how to move goods. You'll learn what the pallet sizes are. You'll learn what the truck sizes are. All these things are going to be useful because you might need to come up with the plan, and you better have rules of thumb. So that context is important for both transportation and warehousing, and then the distribution systems. How do we come up with plans so that we can find alternate routes down here at the bottom is a big thing. And then how can we deal with bottlenecks? Those are the two real takeaways in distribution planning. Is you're going to have to find another way around the damaged infrastructure or the parts of the supply chain that have been disrupted. And then you're going to have bottlenecks where you didn't expect them. How do you deal with those? So that's really the course in a nutshell. The sections release about every 2 weeks until section 4 comes out June 10. You then have the ability to catch up. If you're having, weren't able to do things, you can catch up. People can actually join late and still do the quizzes over the first 3 sections. Those are due on June 17. So that's really the day when you need to decide, I'm going to do the course this time. We've had people watch the videos and not be able to finish it and come back and register next time. That's an option as well if you wanted to come back and do that. But just know June 17 is when the first quizzes will be due. And then the exam comes out a few days later. And then after the exam's release, you can decide if you want to verify and upgrade. Now, those of you who upgrade and into verified status earlier, those are the people we'll be doing the online virtual office hours with and talking through things with you more intensely. It gives you a richer experience, and it allows you to keep the materials into the future. Right now, I think it's 30% off with a code. Did you put that in the chat, I think, Tim? So it's only $100 now to upgrade. So it gives you the access to the materials in perpetuity. Otherwise, the course ends and the materials disappear until the next run. So that's why, verification. And you also would then get a certificate that shows you did the course, which could be useful in your professional journey. So just remembering those dates. Anything else I'm missing, Tim, in terms of the intro to the course?
Nope, not at all. I think we'll be on the discussion boards and answering questions as you get through the material. Yeah, please interact with us.
And this webinar format is a little different. We wanted to make it so that it could be available to a lot of people. But know that Tim and I really enjoy the virtual office hours, getting to know you, talking with people around the world. We learn a lot from you and your experiences and talking through what you've had to deal with or what you anticipate dealing with, or just how logistics and supply chain is different where you're at. I mean, I haven't seen every supply chain in the world, and there's a lot of creativity in how to transport and store things. And so I always love hearing new stories about creativity in procuring and distributing goods to people around the world. So we always talk about every course as a learning journey for all of us. And so Tim and I and Matias, Jason, you can even join too if you want to come back to the virtual office hours and learn with us. It's a really good community to interact with. And Tim and I always say this lifts our day by getting on the discussion boards and chatting with you and having these virtual office hours. So we really do.
The next one will be in a couple weeks.
Yeah. Look
stay
online
tuned.
for the date. Do you have the date, Tim, of the next one?
I think it's May 24th, but I wanted to make sure we get the time set before I announce it to everybody.
So we're setting the time. So look online. We'll schedule that. It can feel lonely to learn on your own asynchronously, but these synchronous moments that we schedule and then the discussion boards to go back and forth are where the action's at. And Tim knows occasionally I'll go down a rabbit hole. If somebody gives me a challenge, I'll go figure it out. I love that. So put some challenges in the discussion board so I can try to figure out how to adapt to the context you give me, right? It's just fun to solve problems together. And also I'll give you my thoughts, and then usually it's somebody else in the discussion says, hey, I have a thought on this too. So definitely do join those discussion boards. Even though we're asynchronous, we can be learning together there, and again in the virtual office hours when we get them set up. So thanks again for joining today.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you, Jason, for coming back after doing the course and and telling us, you know, how the real world will hit you, and that this kind of material can get you ready for that moment.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.